Have any of you played with this toy? It's called 20Q. It plays 20 questions. It's a little like, $15 piece of plastic. They actually had a website up for many years before this toy where they had people playing 20 questions with the website. And if you couldn't guess what you were thinking of, you would enter what it was and give some question to disentangle it. And it was amazing. They basically were harvesting human intelligence into the servers, figuring out what percentage of it was useful, and then burning it into the toy, throwing away the rest. And so this is a very simple, clear example of how computers more and more are being used not to recreate human intelligence, but yet to harvest it and redistribute it in a distilled format. And I think that that's actually been kind of the interesting counterintuitive thing from my point of view, that these communities, and we bring them online, we're never quite sure what they're going to do, but this is really one of my biggest aspirations, in working in community design. Now, when we make games, we're also building these kind of intelligent systems, and these intelligences work at many different levels. And I think that that is the level that is getting more and more interesting to me. You can imagine a game as having like three kind of intelligence levels. You might call sub, peer, and meta. This is kind of relative to what the player level is in a game. The sub AI might be like the simulation, the lower level physics, stuff like that. Peer AI is more the agents around you. It might be other characters, other real players, or it might be NPCs. The meta AI is really coming more and more from the community side. What are the data flows that are happening between players at the higher level above the game? In some sense, the player is building a very intuitive model at the bottom level here. What does it feel like to drive a car in Grand Theft Auto? In the middle level, you want them to build a fairly complex model of how is the sim thinking and behaving. And at the high level, the community level, again, you want it to be fairly simple. SimCity really, you can almost envision as mostly being the sub-level. It was all about the kind of simulation underneath, the surface of the wave of crime, traffic, water, etc. The Sims is really more at the peer level. Something like Sport was really more at this level, the meta level, where it's about sharing content between players. Now, there's diminishing returns at each one of these levels. There's no sense in investing way too much in one level if you're not really mining level above it. And I see a lot of games actually kind of going too far in one direction, but not actually making full use of all three of these areas. You can imagine failure in one of these areas, like the bottom level, is when a character doesn't respect the physics of the world. The next level is when they just start doing really stupid things, the behavioral level. And the meta level really is failure almost of community, or the crowd, or whatever the social experience that you want to build around this thing. So I think that as designers, we need to kind of comprehensively think about what levels are we having the player interact with our systems, and spend the time, efficiently against these levels. On the community side, these communities, if they're successful, can spring up overnight. They're like giant squatter communities. But they're like squatter communities in which everybody in them has a jetpack, and they can leave instantly, because there are a million other communities where they could be that are all competing for their attention at any given point in time. Now, just kind of looking ahead in the future, one thing I love about the future is that we always imagine it to be so wacky, and it always ends up being a lot wackier than we ever thought it would be. In some sense, the future is becoming less and less predictable every year. You can imagine somebody back in the 1700s kind of trying to predict about what 1800 would be like, looking 100 years in the future. And I think they would not have been that far off target. They would have kind of seen the basic trends in technology, fashion, clothing, whatever, and got a pretty good guess. If you can imagine somebody in 1800 looking ahead to 1900, I think they would have been a bit off, but I still think they would have seen a lot of the Industrial Revolution coming. Somebody in 1900 looking at 2000, they were pretty far off, quite a bit more off than actually occurred. But right now, even with our high technology, if we're trying to predict ahead 100 years, I don't think we have a clue. The range of futures that we are kind of looking at that could exist out there is just incredible. And that's kind of what makes it interesting. Ray Kurzweil has kind of made this case repeatedly in his book, The Singularity. And, I think that actually he has a good point to make there, and that just, you can look as far back as you want to in terms of evolution, human culture, technology, whatever it is, and we see this kind of exponential acceleration happening. And that's something that's impacting us, in our industry, almost on a yearly basis at this point. We used to have this very comfortable idea that we had these console cycles, and this is going to happen every 4 years. And, we'd have our ups and downs, but in general, we're kind of riding this rocket ship that was going up, and we would have a few bumps, but recently, over the last couple of years, it's felt like, that rocket ship just kind of blew off and fragmented into 1,000 pieces, and all going off in different directions. And, I've heard a lot of the rants earlier today, a lot of the just talks around this conference about how the industry is imploding, or it's certainly going through a major transformation, which really reminds me of this old Monty Python sketch of the Yorksmen sitting around, and they're all comparing how hard their childhood was, and as somebody who's been in the game industry for 20 plus years, I feel like I've kind of seen this before, and this is nothing, compared to what happened back in 1983. We've been through worse times. In fact, this is a far more exciting time, because back in '83, basically all the platforms were dying. There was nothing new, nothing coming in to replace them. So I, in fact, think this is probably one of the most healthy times I've ever seen in the video game industry. We can look at the music industry, which is going through its own kind of major disruption. And, there were about 1.2 billion songs downloaded last year. These were legally downloaded, which, really equates to about 120 million digital albums. Plus there were an additional 80 million digital albums bought, which means about 200 million digital albums, that people downloaded. But last year there were still 300 million compact discs. So even the tremendous transition that the music industry is going through is still, happening in a little bit of a slow motion relative to kind of our perception of it. It's actually interesting to see they're still selling vinyl records and cassette tapes. All the cassette tapes are almost dead. And so the music industry is going through a major dip in the revenues. I think the game industry will as well. But if you actually look at how quickly these new platforms are going to probably take off on the backside of that, I think it's more than going to compensate for it if you kind of zoom back and look at the whole trend line. I think it's pretty clear though, digital distribution is something that is the way of the future. I don't think that that's something that's going to go away. It's just going to continually grow and grow. In some sense, even when I'm ordering purely physical items, I always go to Amazon on my computer. And for me, my computer and Amazon is like the replicator on Star Trek. Anything I can think of, I go to the computer, type it in, and it magically appears the next day in a box. So even if we're not doing digital distribution, just digital sales and kind of digital business is already, I think, kind of become the norm. This isn't great from an environmental point of view compared to digital distribution, but Facebook, of course, has gotten a lot of attention, I think, at the conference this year. These are the top-selling games, about a year and a half ago for Facebook. About 6 million was the top game. This is the curve from this year. I've kind of normalized the curves here. Now it's about 50 million. So you see this tremendous growth in that platform, which is why I think you see so much interest kind of in social games as a platform. But if you actually look at the curve, the shape of that curve is getting steeper. So that means it's getting much more exponential, much more of a power law distribution here, which is not necessarily good. Even though the numbers are much higher. I think that you can almost imagine anything in the real world. You can describe it in terms of like 3 basic laws, or 3 basic curves: power law, the S curve, and the bell curve. Now, it's very dangerous when you're looking into the future to extrapolate from a curve like this, because what people tend to do is they tend to apply a power curve to this. And so when you make an extrapolation based upon that, you're usually going to be way off, when in fact what you were really looking at was an S curve. I think right now, that's kind of a lot of what I've been hearing. People are kind of seeing this as a power law curve, when in fact it is going to be an S curve. Now, it gets a lot of attention, of course, because investors, when they want to invest in something, they are looking to invest in the steep part of this curve. And so that's why you get a lot of kind of business interest in a certain platform. And it's not that I don't think social games are not going to be big. I think they're going to be quite large. I can imagine them becoming about a quarter of the market, really. But you have to kind of back up in the whole context of what the entertainment market is doing in general. I think games in general, relative to other entertainment industries, are still on a very strong growth path. And so the whole pie is going to be getting bigger, even if it's going to take local dips, in the near term. So we've got all these different platforms, which bring us tremendous opportunities. All these different new kind of directions we can go in game design. And there are going to be a lot of golden eggs out there. And I think that's why it's so exciting to kind of be at this point in the industry right now. Of course, in this instance, it's kind of like having a Easter egg hunt, minefield, because as we've heard, there are a lot of companies going under. There are a lot of kind of areas in here where you're just going to go bust. You're not, guaranteed to find a peak in that landscape. But it just kind of comes with the territory. But it's kind of worth remembering that a lot of these things that were like really weird, little offbeat things from years ago. How many of you played Parappa the Rapper? Yeah, that was a great game. Which really there's almost direct lineage to the big budget music games now. How many of you actually played Dazzleoids though? Oh, now that was the predecessor to Parappa, which was totally this indie little weird thing by Wright and Greenblatt. So it's interesting how even the large established genres that we have now have their precedence in these really offbeat, quirky little things that were produced, for very small amounts of money way back. So we basically have a hive mind entertaining. Our kids are turning into Borg. We have the ability to create these imaginary models great complexity and share them with others. And it's transforming the world. So, in the words of Robert C. Gallagher, change is inevitable, except from a vending machine. So, I'm going to stop now. I went over time. I'm sorry. Bye.